Good afternoon. Can you make sure you're muted as you enter? We're just going to give people a moment to come in from the waiting room and we will begin.
If we weren't, it probably would be worse.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen and we will get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Boston Cannabis Board and the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion info session. Today is April 25th, 2022. So just a quick agenda. We're going to go over introductions, the role of the BCB, the process, buffer zones, equity certification, technical assistance, the equity fund, and the equity pre-certification. So meet the team. So the Cannabis Board process are made up of two different offices, the Boston Cannabis Board and the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. On the BCB side, you have myself, Jasmine Nguyen. I am the Cannabis Board Manager, and Allison Quinn, who is the Project Manager. And our role is to basically help you with the entire life cycle of your application. So the time you submit your application to the time you're ready to open your doors, you'll be dealing with us through the process. And on the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion side, we have Aaliyah Forrest, who is the Cannabis Business Manager, and Joseph Gilmore, who is the Cannabis Fund Manager. So all of our contact information is here. Again, these slides and the presentation will be posted on our website, so don't feel like you have to hurry up and rush and write everything down. So Cannabis Establishments. In 2020, the Mayor's Office and the Boston City Council passed the ordinance establishing the Boston Cannabis Board. So we are tasked with citing these cannabis establishments throughout the city of Boston. We are tasked with ensuring the equity of the issuance of these cannabis licenses, both in terms of whom they are issued to and where they are issued in the city of Boston. Pursuant to Mass General Law, Boston must cite a minimum of 52 retail recreational cannabis dispensaries. This excludes any other cannabis types. So not medical, cultivation, laboratory, manufacturing, delivery. This is strictly retail. We have to have a minimum of 52. And where that number comes from is from 20% of our package stores. So between 20%, whatever that number is, we got 52. So Boston Cannabis Board members, everyone always asks, who are these, mysterious people that are granting these licenses? These are our lovely board members. It's 5 appointed members, and each has a specific expertise. So Kathleen Joyce, who is our chair, she is the member with experience with city's licensing and regulation processes. Commissioner Holmes, she's our member with public safety. Commissioner Darlene Lombos, she's a member with organized labor and worker rights. Commissioner John Smith is our member with economic development. And Alejandro Sanguin is a member with experience in public health policy. And we also created a brief bio of each of our commissioners if you want to look at that at a later time. So these are the different types of licensing types. We all know retail, medical, cultivation is becoming a big one. We just wanted to give an overview of all the different license types. And also, if you click on each one, it'll bring you to the exact definition of what each license type is. So just wanted to give an overview of how many different types of licenses that are currently. So the process, how do you get a license in Boston? So we created this lovely process flow chart that hopefully is helpful to people to navigate. It looks more intimidating than what it is, but I'm gonna walk through it and give a high level overview of it just because I wanna make sure we have time for question and answers, and I'm sure we can dissect this process all day. So to begin, you're gonna submit an application online via our portal. And basically for that, you're gonna submit your floor plan, all your ownership disclosures, your security and operations plan, your legal right to occupy the premise, which can be in the form of a lease, letter of intent, or a deed. Just make sure that when you do submit your legal right to occupy the premise, that it runs to the entity in which you're applying for. So the lease can't just say, I'm leasing to Jasmine. It has to be Jasmine's corporation or whatever the name is. That's very important. You also want to simultaneously, you should be doing these two things. You should be submitting to the BCB, but you should also be submitting for your underlying zoning relief. So you're always going to need relief for a cannabis establishment, as it's either conditional or forbidden use. So it doesn't matter where you're located in the city of Boston, you're going to have to go through zoning relief, as the process is right now. Once you do that, you're going to receive a denial letter, because like I said, you're going to have to get.
After this,
Can everyone just make sure they're muted? I think someone just unmuted themselves. So like I said, once you receive your denial letter, you're gonna also start the appeal process for your ZBA hearing. After that, you then can schedule your neighborhood services meeting, which is the statutorily meeting that you have to have under the CCC guidelines. That's the bare minimum that you have to do, is have that one statutory community meeting. But as you may or may not know, some neighborhoods have multiple civic organizations that you should also meet with, because obviously those are big players in the neighborhoods. You want to make sure you're getting your business out there. So you want to talk to as many people as possible. So after you do that, you will have the actual host community meeting. After your meeting, you want to request a letter of support or non-opposition from your district city councilor. So it's important that you're contacting them as well during this process. The city councilor has 45 days to respond to that letter. Now, we've seen them come back the day after the community meeting, or we've seen them come back 45 days. So it just all depends on the city councilor. Once you receive that letter, your application should be complete. This is just a brief checklist. Obviously, it's case-by-case basis. We may need additional documentation. So that's why at the bottom it says additional materials may be required, just depending on the location. So after that, you're gonna come down. The BCB receives your application, we review it for accuracy, and a transactional hearing must occur within 30 days. Or for non-equity applicants, until there's a 1-to-1 ratio of equity to non-equity. So what's that mean? You're an equity applicant and you have a completed application by the last business day, you will be on the following month. If you're a non-equity applicant, you have to be paired with an equity applicant. So if we have an equity applicant ready to go for the next month, and then a non-equity applicant is also ready to go, they will be paired and they will be on the following month. If we have a non-equity applicant that is ready to go, but not an equity applicant, that non-equity applicant has to wait until an equity applicant is ready to go. So it's paired to keep the 1-to-1. So our transactional hearings typically occur the second Wednesday of each month. At the hearing, each applicant is given 10 minutes to present their business plan, followed by Q&A and public testimony. The following week, the voting hearings typically occur the third Wednesday of each month. Voting outcomes are as follows. So reject with prejudice means the applicant can reapply after 1 year. So they cannot do anything at that specific location for a year if they choose to pursue it a year from when they got rejected with prejudice. Rejected without prejudice means that the applicant can reapply, but it's basically a new application. It's either grant or conditionally grant. So usually your application is just granted when there's no buffer zone. If there is a buffer zone, then it's conditionally granted, because obviously you have to get zoning relief. Or it's deferred due to many reasons. The board wants more information on a certain aspect of your plan, whichever, so your application will be deferred. So once you have your outcome, only with BCB approval will the BCB execute a host community agreement. At this time, our host community agreements are basically formed. The only thing that's really differed from the host community agreements is obviously your license type. Not everyone's applying for the same license type, and any conditions the board may put on it. So like no single pre-rolls or whichever. So that's what would all be incorporated into your host community agreement. Once you have your executed host community agreement, you have your zoning board of appeals meeting. Only with zoning board of appeals will you be able to move down to submit to the state. Now, the CCC is a completely different process. But once you submit your application to the CCC, within 90 days of your license application, the commission will either issue you a provisional license or a rejection. A provisional license is what allows you to build out and have your state inspections. The CCC will notify the BCB of a completed inspection and that your business may commence operations. The BCB will then work with you in order for you to receive your physical license. And then we move up. And before issuing a physical license to an applicant, the applicant should submit these following things. There's a checklist here. Don't have to go into them in detail, but these are all the documents we would need to in order to give you an actual license. And then finally, you receive your physical license and you may open. So again, that was a high level view of our application process. I hope this flow chart is, it makes sense and it's helpful. But always happy to discuss offline and email, phone call, Zoom, whichever, if you want to discuss any aspect of this in more detail. All right, buffer zone conflicts. And this applies to all marijuana establishment types. So that grid that we showed you before, buffer zones apply to all of them. So half-mile buffer zone. Pursuant to the City of Boston zoning code, in order to site a cannabis establishment within a half-mile of an existing cannabis establishment, the BCB applies a heightened level of scrutiny as defined in its rules and regulation. This also requires a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals. So it's important to know, what does the BCB consider existing cannabis establishment? Because I know a few people have gone to the ZBA, they got approved by the BCB, gone to the ZBA and got rejected, but they're also in legal litigation with the ZBA. So the BCB still considers that application as an active host community agreement until we find out the outcome of that. So say, for instance, you know that this applicant did not get their zoning relief, but you can ask us, or people know as public knowledge at this point, that they are in active litigation with ZBA. That host community agreement is still valid with the BCB. Therefore, your application is going to be treated as a buffer zone conflict. Hopefully that's clear. So high level of scrutiny, you're going to have to submit an applicant statement, basically answering all these questions here. We don't have to go through them. I'll read them to you to death. And you're also going to have to submit documentation of support. Now, a lot of people love form letters and petitions. I love them too, but we actually need 3 letters of support. So it can be email, handwritten, whichever. It doesn't have to be a long declaration, but it has to be from someone saying, I support your business. It can't just be, 100 signatures. Those don't count as the 3 letters of support. And they can be from anyone, community organization leaders, direct abutters, elected officials, whoever. We just need 3 official letters. The school buffer zones. Pursuant to Mass General Law, cannabis establishment cannot be located within 500 feet of an existing public or private K-12 school providing education. There is no waiver to the school buffer zone, and there are specific requirements on how this is measured, which is in the CCC regulations. So unfortunately, daycares do not count, YMCAs do not count. So it has to be, again, a public or private school K-12. And I'll turn it over to Aaliyah.
Thanks, Jasmine. And the folks that are putting questions in the chat, we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. So I am Aaliyah Forrest, the Cannabis Business Manager in the Mayor's Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. I see a lot of familiar names on this meeting list, so nice to see you all again. Let's go to the next slide. Perfect. So in addition to the Boston Cannabis Board licensing process, there is an equity certification process that runs in tandem to your application. So there isn't a separate equity application. It is it runs in tandem to the process itself of getting your license. Once you submit an application to the Boston Cannabis Board, if you're interested in being designated as an equity applicant, you'll be connected with me, and we'll go through what you need to qualify for the program. The benefits of being an equity applicant include being connected to technical assistance providers, depending on your business development needs. You'll be qualified to apply for an equity fund grant, which my colleague Joe will share more about later. Additionally, as Jasmine mentioned in that beautiful process flowchart, Boston Cannabis Board agendas are all built with a one-to-one equity lens. So for every non-equity applicant on the agenda, an equity applicant is also put on the agenda. So this could speed up the cannabis licensing process for equity applicants potentially. Next slide. Right here, to go a little deeper, this is the current eligibility criteria. In order to be designated as a cannabis equity applicant, you must fit at least 3 of the following on this list. I think most importantly, your business can only qualify if 51% of your ownership group meets 3 of these. So 51% is the important number to remember. I'll go ahead and read this list out loud so it's in your memory forever. And everything in yellow was recently added by the city council and the mayor last summer. So here they are. A person who has resided in an area of disproportionate impact, or we call it ADI or DIA, depending on what you're reading, as defined by the CCC for at least 5 of the last 10 years. A person who has a past arrest or conviction of the possession, sale, or manufacturing or cultivation of marijuana between 1971 and 2016, who has been a resident of Boston for the past 5 years, or is the child of a person with a past arrest, etc. A person who has resided in the city of Boston for at least the past 7 years. A person who is Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, or Indigenous descent. A person whose annual household income is at or below 100% of the area median income of where you're opening your business. So if you're opening a business in Boston, it'd be the AMI of Boston. If it's in Holyoke, it'd be the AMI in Holyoke. A person who has been certified by the CCC as an economic empowerment applicant or a social equity applicant in the CCC social equity program, and is a resident of Boston for at least 1 of the last 3 years. And then finally, a person who is a former member of the Armed Forces of the United States, including the Space Force, who served on active duty and was discharged under conditions which were other than dishonorable. Next slide. We also have the Technical Assistance Program for Cannabis Equity Applicants. This is a program that I run. We provide one-on-one support to folks that qualify, and the last slide's eligibility requirements. Can I get the next slide? Because that's where all the examples of TA projects are. It's a rolling RFP similar to the Small Business Technical Assistance Program that our office also runs. We've seen a lot of different projects come out in this past year, including navigating investment deals to secure capital, improving business plans, creating or improving security plans and traffic studies. That's been a very popular, those 2 have been the most popular, I would say, because they're required by the CCC. Well, not the traffic studies, but security plans for sure. Traffic studies are helpful if your business establishment is in a congested area and you're having community meetings and hear that it's a problem. Crafting marketing plans, designing websites, brand development. We even have a project with app development happening right now for one of our establishments. Currently, we have 10 TA providers with ranging backgrounds. Some of them have a lot of experience working with cannabis equity applicants, and some have a lot of experience working with any small business owner, mostly in urban areas. Next slide. Oh, now I'm going to toss it over to my colleague, Joe.
Thanks, Aaliyah.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Gilmore. I'm the Cannabis Fund Manager in the Mayor's Office of Economic and Opportunity Inclusion. And I am someone that many of you have communicated with for questions about the equity program. And I also oversee the Boston Equity Fund, which provides $15,000 grants for certified Boston equity applicants. And so we started out with $400,000 in the fund total. We give out $15,000 individual grants. We have awarded 22 applicants so far. And mostly they've been used on things like rent, legal fees, architects, and traffic studies. However, the caveat with the Boston Equity Program is that in order to receive funding and in order to receive technical assistance, you must first have acquired a property or letter of intent, as well as an active application with the BCB. So the next slide, we'll talk about the pre-certification for the Boston Equity Program. So just recognizing that we need to provide more support for applicants in earlier stages of the process, people who don't have their real estate yet. Our office has created the pre-certification, which is provided to applicants who are able to demonstrate that they're able to qualify for the equity program. And so far, we've provided 11 pre-certifications to qualifying applicants to help them in negotiations with third parties like investors or landlords.
Sorry, I can't find the unmute button. So that is our presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Jasmine, we had a couple of questions in the chat. The first one was, who determines and agrees upon the details that go into the host community agreement?
All right, who determines? So as I mentioned, our host community agreements are formed at this point. So if you look on our website, all of our host community agreements are on there. They are pretty much the same standard. They've been that way since the beginning of the Cannabis Board was established. The only thing that differs in the host community agreements is, like I said, if there are any special conditions that the board put on the license, or like a couple places down in the bid have special conditions on their license. Like I said, like no pre-rolls, no lines to form, so things like that. So those are the only things that make each host community agreement different. Other than that, they're pretty much form at this point, and they're all available on our website if you want to look at them.
The second question that came up in the chat was, is the half-mile driving distance or walking distance? And I think that's related to the buffer zone.
Yeah, so that's walking distance, not driving distance.
That is all we had in the chat. I don't know if you want to open it up to any further questions from the participants.
Yeah. If anyone would like to ask any questions, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself, whichever, and we'll call on you if anyone else has any questions. Or you can write in the chat too. Okay, William.
Yes, hi. Thank you, everyone. I probably emailed a couple of you before, so nice to see you guys' faces. But I just had a question about, what about like marijuana establishments that aren't built yet, but like they're in the process of building? Like, how does that work with like the buffer zone when they're not actually operational yet?
Yeah, so a lot of these places aren't built yet. So that's why in our rules and regulations, we define what existing cannabis establishment is. So as long as you have an executed HCA and zoning relief, you're considered existing cannabis establishment.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank
And
you.
also just want to add that I'm going to link to a very helpful map that is on the BCB's website that has where all of the executed host community agreements are in the city. So you can see the map, and I think it's helpful as you go through the licensing process when you submit an application.
Are you talking about the cannabis registry, Elia, right? Is that
Yeah, the
map?
registry and your map and the HCA map. I think they're both helpful.
Right.
Oh, can you see that, Jess? We have another question from the chat feature. If the BCB, the Boston Cannabis Board, awards a host community agreement, then must the applicant still go before the Zoning Board of Appeals?
Yes, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, you need zoning relief. Cannabis is not an allowed use in the city of Boston, so you're gonna have to go to zoning regardless. So even if you get an HCA, it's your job to go and get your underlying use from zoning. And Michael has his hand raised. Michael?
Yes, just to follow up on the first question, I don't think you quite answered it. They asked who makes the decision on adding the conditions in the host community agreement? I assume it's the Boston Cannabis Board.
Yeah, it's
But
the, during the, sorry, go ahead.
But I think the implication is how can the community influence the Boston Cannabis Board and get conditions added to the host community agreement?
I think that's, I mean, during the hearing, the board listens to all of the community feedback. And I think they will take into consideration if one poses like, we would like, if the, say a community group was like, we would like these conditions on that license, I think the board will take that into consideration. It's all about a conversation and dialogue.
Okay, thank you.
We have another question in the chat feature. Is this webinar recorded? Will there be a way to access this later? Yes.
Yes, this will be posted on our Boston Cannabis Board website under our presentations. The video and the slides will be posted.
And we have another question. If you are a social equity certificate holder and Boston resident, can you qualify for these benefits with a property outside of Boston?
So is the property outside of Boston the actual business establishment? And if so, if it's not in the City of Boston funds will not be able to be utilized for this program, even if you are a Boston resident. It's a business development program specifically for Boston businesses. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
A question. Hello,
Sure.
everyone.
Hi.
So regarding to the ISD refusal
Mhm.
and VA, can you tell me a little bit about how that process works? So I log into the portal and there's an option that says use of premises. Is that the one that I'm clicking on? Because
Yeah.
okay, so use of premises,
Mhm.
and do I have to just submit the plans that they're asking me to upload at that point, or is that for the appeal?
No, so you do submit the plans first because they need to look at your plans.
Okay.
So once they look at your, I'm not gonna say here like I'm an ISD expert, I am not. So I do believe the plans are submitted and then they will walk you through the process from there. But they definitely have to look and approve your plans at that time.
Okay, and then we're assuming that everyone gets denied, right? That's the reason.
Everyone does, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, someone asked, can we get more than one area of tech support?
So that's Janice. We have done that. So for technical assistance, we have, helped with business plan development and then potentially later on, maybe a traffic study as they get closer to either the Boston Cannabis Board meeting date or a community meeting date, and they want to have that in hand. But I think something to keep in mind is we do not do two technical assistance projects with the same business at the same time. So you can't dip into the fund until one project is over and complete. And we also, at this point, we're at the end, almost the end of the fiscal year. So we're sort of being more particular as to what the project is, and want to be sure that we're being equitable on how the TA money is spread. So we probably wouldn't do 2 projects with one business at this time, but perhaps later once we know what our full budget is for the next fiscal year.
Thanks, Leah. There's another question in the chat. Is there a typical time period between the granting of a host community agreement and getting a zoning board of appeals date?
Good question. So yeah, usually once we inform the ZBA that you're all set to move forward with your appeal process, usually you'll get a date within a month, 2 months tops. I haven't seen anything longer than that. So it's usually like a month or 2 months that you'll get a ZBA date. Any other questions? No one? No?
I just want to share that we're always, me and Joe talk to a lot of equity applicants, even if you don't have like a question about certification or anything in particular. If you have questions about anything as you go through the process, give me, Joe, Jasmine, Allison a call. We're always available. And we do talk to a lot of you.
I'm like, let me correct that. My preferred method is via email.
Oh, sorry.
No, because I know probably everyone's like, she always has email. But no, my preferred method is email just because it's a lot of information. So I prefer to email you all the information. And then after, if you have follow-up questions, then I feel like a phone call is warranted at that point. But I just feel like it's a lot of information for me to just tell you over the phone and you're like writing it down. I'd rather send you all the information, you review it, and then if you have follow-up questions, happy to set up a Zoom or a phone call. That's just my preferred.
No, that's great. I'm sorry for just assuming it. For
No.
me, I'm open to phone calls and emails because I get both of them.
Yeah. All right, if no one else has any questions, so we're not all looking at each other.
Oh, there's one. There's one.
Must architectural plans be submitted at the ISD level? Yes, I believe. Allison, do you know it? I'm pretty sure that's a yes.
So yes, in order for your plan or any plan to be evaluated with inspectional services, the building department is going to want to see actual architectural plans with elevations. Hope that's helpful.
Any other questions?
About just follow-up question about the ISD. Do you know how detailed those architectural plans have to be at that beginning stage?
So my understanding is when you're submitting it to our department, that the cannabis board, it's very loosely based. When you get to ISD, they're going to want to see the footprint of your building. They're going to want to see, entrance, egress, mechanicals, those types of things. If you call, once you submit it, you can always reach out to the building department for additional questions. They have a whole bunch of resources and folks are fairly helpful over there.
Thank you.
Do architectural plans have to be stamped? Typically, when you submit plans to ISD, they should be stamped by an engineer. I don't know at what stage they require that those be submitted. My guess is that would be the first submission would require a stamp plan. But again, ISD is better equipped to handle these particular questions because that's the agency that will review the plans.
Any other questions? Seeing none. So like I said, all our contact information is on the slides. It'll be posted no later than tomorrow morning, if not by the end of the day today. We're always here as a resource to, get you all up and running on your endeavors. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.